to Small Arms Solutions Crime Series. Today we're looking at the SKS. Now, a lot of the videos that we have on Crime Series are generally what you refer to as crap guns. They're cheap guns that were not really safe, but they're commonly referred to as the Ring of Fire guns. The SKS fits the term cheap gun, but it is not a bad gun. The SKS, in fact, is an incredible rifle that has been used throughout the world, particularly in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was where it really got its attention. In the crime lab, this was a rifle that we saw quite a bit. And the reason was not because it was bad, it was because it was inexpensive. They could buy them for, at the time when I was working in the crime lab, these could be had for, $100, $150. They were not really expensive. In fact, there was a time when I was a kid, I was working in a gun shop around 1994. I can remember us getting a crate of these things that were all still full of cosmoline that we sold for $89 a piece. So again, this is not about the quality. It's just about they were inexpensive. Now this particular one here happens to be a Soviet one, 1951. This weapon came into use in 1945, and these really started coming in the late 80s. Most of the ones that were coming in originally were all Chinese. So originally you had the Chinese ones, and then around 1994 or so, in that area in there, is when we started to see the first Soviet ones come in. This particular one here is one of the first Soviet ones to come into the United States. This, at that time, was probably around 200. This was at one of their parade grade, as you can see, the stainless steel bolt, the stainless steel blade bayonet. The Chinese ones, as you'll see photographs of, have a spike bayonet to them. I won't say the Russian ones are any better made. They tend to have a little bit better wood on them. They're about the same. I really can't say one's any better than the other. Now, we had seen these quite a bit going through the crime lab, as I said. Now, they were used in various methods. This one has a 10-shot magazine. You can see a 10-shot non-detachable magazine. You also would see these insertions that came from Pro Mag and other places like that would go in. However, those things were not very reliable. Then you would see ones that were like tanker models, as they were called, which took AK magazines. Then we started seeing some other ones come in, some East German, and then we also saw some Yugoslavian ones come in as well. Yugoslavians, I don't know if I ever saw in the lab, at least not in my time. Those were considered more the higher-end SKSs. Same with East Germans. These were going in the hands of collectors. They weren't going in the hands of criminals. So let's go a little bit over what the rifle is. Now, rifle 7.62x39, again, SKS 1945, Sergei Simonov was the designer. This fed from a 10-shot non-detachable magazine, and it utilized a stripper clip. So the stripper clip would go in, and you would push the rounds down in. Of course, you could also put them in one at a time, but this was generally the way the ammunition was issued for them to go into the magazine. So basically what we have is a short stroke piston, a very reliable, very accurate gun. We'd also seen a lot of these would come in with the modified stocks, choke stocks and whatnot, where you'd have a pistol grip and you'd have a folding stock, because you could do that with these. Of course, in the ban era, when these were still being imported, they basically had to remove the bayonet lugs, and that made them basically compliant with the assault weapon ban. So this was one of those guns you could have even in some of these occupied states today. SKS is still legal because it's 10 rounds and under. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of this gun. So we have a safety, which engaged. Basically, this is just a mechanical block. So when this is engaged, you basically can't pull the trigger back. Now, if you want to unload the rifle, you pull that down, and your ammunition would drop out the bottom. Now, again, the bayonet, we never saw any drive-by bayonetings when I was in the crime lab either. Now, there was one thing that we did notice with these. These things had a tendency to go auto or do a couple shots. Reason being is these firing pins were extremely heavy. So what would happen is, mostly when you use American-made ammunition, what would happen is it would slam fire and it would set the cartridges off, and you get 2 or 3 or 4 shots off. So I tend to recommend that people do not use American-made ammunition, only use Soviet or Chinese that are very, very heavy, have very heavy primers, so that won't happen. Now, there's more interesting details on this. When I was a forensic scientist, I developed a technique, which if we were to retrieve cartridge cases off of the crime scenes, I developed a technique which would tell you whether they were fired out of an SKS or an AK. Now, that was based off of the receiver marks during ejection. Basically, what we did was we probably fired maybe 200 of these SKSs, AKs, AKMs. I had actually some laboratories that were involved with this. They would send me the cartridge cases, and we would do the study. And we found 100% of the time, you would be able to say with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that these were, in fact, fired out of the SKS or an AK. Now, after the paper was done, it was submitted to our Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners. At that point, they had published it. And it was extremely well received. It's now in use by the ATF Firearms Training Academy. It's something that every firearms examiner is now taught. So, as you're going to see from the photographs, you'll see what it looks like out of an SKS. You'll see it's a straight line on the lower portion of the cartridge case. You'll also be able to see in the photograph where the cartridge case is sticking out and where it actually impacts on the receiver. Then you'll take a look at the AK-47. You'll see the same thing. You'll see that it strikes up much higher. Now, depending on the receiver cover, we could even say whether we were looking for a AK-47 type or an AKM type, because on the AK-47 you had sharp edges, and on the AKM the stamp receiver cover was bent inward, and it would be more of a fat blunt mark. So we could even go down to that to be able to tell you whether this was fired out of SKS, AK, AKM. We could even do that. AK-47 and AKM was a little bit more difficult because not all AKMs that are out there, stamp receivers, have those kind of receiver covers. In fact, if you look at the Chinese Type 56, those particular rifles are a mixed breed between AKM and AK-47. They kept the AK-47 receiver cover. They went with a lighter stamp receiver. They stuck with the gas block, the gas tube, covering gas tube of the AK-47. So again, it was sort of a hybrid. So the AKM wasn't as good to say, hey, this is an AKM, because there was some that did use different kinds of receiver covers, but the location of the mark never changed. So we had several cases involving these. These are mostly used by gangs. That's what we had found. They were taken during, not necessarily during shootings, but they were taken during busts into the drug houses they were taking. But we did have many cartridge cases left over from crime scenes and bullets. So one of the things that's very unique about the Soviet or the AK-47s and SKSs is the firing pin. Now, there's two kinds of firing pins that we generally see in rifles: hemispherical and what we call circular. Hemispherical is what you see here, like with NATO type weapons. There's a rounded ball on the end of the firing pin. These are it's a flat. You're hitting a much larger part of the surface of the primer. And why was that designed that way? It was because of the burn-in primers. The burn-in primers are significantly harder to ignite than standard boxer primers. So you have a larger firing pin in AKs and SKSs that covers a wider amount of space. So we can also tell by looking at the firing pin marks whether we were looking for an AK or an SKS type. So there was other things that we were very unique to these types of weapons that we were able to see. If we saw hemispherical, we knew we were looking for more of an AR type that fired 7.62 by 39. But without a doubt, what we saw with the SKSs and AKs, regardless of what country they were made in, they were in fact circular. So let's take a look at how this thing works. Now for disassembly, you lift up on the disassembly latch, you pull out, and the receiver cover comes right out. You remove your recoil spring, pull the bolt back, lift up. And when you take a look at this locking mechanism, it has some similarities to that of the STG-44. So basically what it is, it's locked into place. Then when the bolt comes back, it lifts it out of engagement, brings it back, and then it re-engages. So it's a little bit reminiscent of that of the Sturmgewehr. Now, I do believe that this design by Simonov existed prior to that of the STG-44. The last thing you would do is take a look at the gas system. This one you had to be a little bit careful with because of the way that it worked. First we take off the gas tube. Once we take that off, we tip it forward, and there's our operating rod. Now there's also a return spring that you have to be very careful when you pull the push forward on this assembly latch. It pushes forward, and there actually is your piston. So this is short stroke. Operating rod strikes the piston goes back, strikes the carrier. That's what drives the bolt back. So this is your basic system. Again, very robust. Again, this one started seeing its due in the Vietnam War, mostly issued by the Chinese. You saw a lot of them in the Vietnam War. That was really the introduction, because from 1945 to 1960, 63 or 65, Soviet Union was not really engaged in many battles, and the AK-47 replaced it almost immediately. Again, SKS 45, 1945, AK-47, 1947. And we never really even saw the AKs until the early 50s. So there was certainly a time lapse, and again, Russia shared all their technology with China. Now, again, between the two, for as far as quality and accuracy, you don't see much of a difference. However, the Soviet ones were not chrome-plated. The Chinese ones were chrome-plated. So reassembly, again, you got to be really careful with this so it doesn't bounce forward on you. Push that in all the way. Then once we get there, we bring that. So once we get that locked into place, again, that's the hard part. You make sure fortunately this is very easy. You can't put it in the wrong way, because the back end of it will stick out. So we're going to place that right back on the gas block, push that down, lock it in place, hit the detent. Now we basically have to put the bolt carrier together, so you're going to put it into the unlock position, drop it in place. Now again, want to make sure your magazine is out of the way. It goes forward. Now when you put your spring in, you're going with this end front. Drop it in, push it forward. There you have it. So you're going to be seeing several photographs of, from my actual study. So it shows you exactly what I had done. You'll see some pictures of the breech faces. You're going to see pictures that show the difference between a circular breech face and a hemispherical. Again, that was a key way that a forensic firearms examiner could say, again, SKS, AK, or an AR based. And again, that was some work that I had done that they still use today, and they probably will forever. My area of expertise was always military small arms. In fact, probably the best case I ever had was involving an SKS. I was working at the Monroe County Crime Lab in Rochester, New York, and there was a homicide investigation. And oddly enough, the actual Monroe County District Attorney was taking that case. It was a very, very high-profile case. And evidently, he went to our lab director and requested me to do the case. Well, my boss, the head of the firearms examiner, he was not happy. He was saying the DA doesn't tell us, who to assign to cases. So, if I do recall that the ADA, or the DA, brought this up to the director of public safety, and I ended up getting put on the case. Now, I didn't know this was all going on in the background. And the reason why I was asked to do this by him is my specialization was in military small arms, assault rifles. So he evidently knew that he was going to need that. So when I got on the stand, they started asking all kinds of questions. Who developed the gun? At what time? At what point in time was it developed? What's the difference between an SKS and an AK? How can you tell the difference? Because all we had at the time were cartridge cases. So I was able to describe exactly what we were looking at. They tried to throw all this history at me, which fortunately, because I was specialized in this, I was able to answer. Evidently, the ADA knew that your average firearms examiner probably would not know all that information, because your average firearms examiner they're very good with firearms. They know a lot. They know the scope work. They know this determination. They know the actual forensics aspect. When it comes to the details of firearms history, unless they have a particular interest in a certain platform, they really don't know all that background. So it'll be very easy to stump somebody on that kind of history. So I got off the stand and testified. After I testified, I got back to my office, and I got a call from the DA telling me that I did an incredible job. They got their conviction, and that the jury was very impressed with my presentation. And as hard as that defense attorney worked, he couldn't discredit me. He couldn't throw anything at me that I couldn't answer. So, and that's actually very rare. And I testified over probably around 300 times in a 10-year time period, mostly in New York. Most of the defense attorneys were public defenders. These were not what you would call the top of their class. And most of these guys couldn't afford their own, big time defense attorneys. Where in this case they did. They brought in somebody who pretty much knew what they were doing, even though they did lose. But this was one of the few times I was challenged on the stand. And the reason why you don't get challenged on the stand is unless they know the answers, they're not going to ask you a question that they don't already know the answer to. So if every question he's going to ask me is going to basically condemn his client even further, they're not going to ask those questions. They will try to discredit me by, if I go on the stand and they ask a question and I can't answer it, that loses credibility in the eyes of the jury if I can't answer it. So in this case, it was very critical to have somebody who knew the details on this. I guess my reputation, was very well known in the DA's office for what I did. So that was there's another interesting story. And again, that was regarding an SKS. I had showed the jury the cartridge case. I showed them the marking, described my study, so they knew what they were looking for. So there's some more interesting aspects of my career as a forensic scientist. I hope you guys do enjoy this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share.